Have you ever watched your favorite team make a move so spectacularly stupid that it physically hurts to think about it years later? Because that's exactly what happened on February 19th, 2020, when Kyle Dubas made what might be the single worst trade decision in recent Toronto Maple Leafs history. And the painful irony is that it came from a GM who was otherwise building something truly special. The golden era that almost was. Let's start with some context that makes this whole situation even more maddening. Kyle Dubas wasn't just some random analytics nerd who stumbled into the GM position. This guy was a legitimate development wizard who had built something extraordinary with the Toronto Marlies. We're talking about a farm system that produced everyday NHL players like they were coming off an assembly line. Think about the names that came through Dubas' development pipeline. Zach Hyman, Connor Brown, Kasperi Kapanen, Andreas Johnson, Travis Dermott, Timothy Liljegren, Rasmus Sandin, and Justin Hall. That's not just a good prospect pool. That's a Calder Cup championship roster that became the foundation of the modern Maple Leafs. Dubas had cracked the code on developing talent, finding diamonds in the rough, and turning late-round picks into legitimate NHL contributors. This wasn't luck or coincidence. This was systematic excellence in player development, and it showed that Dubas understood something fundamental about building championship teams. You need depth, you need players who buy into your system, and you need guys who can contribute meaningful minutes without breaking your salary cap. The Marlies weren't just winning games. They were proving that smart development could create sustainable competitive advantages. But here's where the story takes a devastating turn, because just when Dubas had perfected this development model, he decided to abandon it in the most frustrating way possible. The prospect that had everything Mason Marchment wasn't your typical prospect. And that's exactly what made trading him so inexcusable. This wasn't some undersized skilled player who might never translate to the NHL level. This was a 6'5", 215-pound power forward with legitimate NHL bloodlines. His father, Brian, had played over 900 NHL games, so the hockey intelligence was clearly in the DNA. But what made Marchment truly special was his development trajectory. His skating improved dramatically during his time in the AHL, showing the kind of work ethic and coachability that separates prospects who make it from those who don't. Sure, he never scored more than 13 goals in an AHL season, but anyone who watched him play understood that scoring wasn't a complete picture of his value. Marchment was the guy who showed up in the biggest moments. When the Marlies won the Calder Cup in 2018, it was Marchment who scored the championship-winning goal. That's not a coincidence. That's character. That's clutch performance. That's exactly the kind of player who becomes invaluable during playoff runs when games get tighter and more physical. The most frustrating part is that Marchment represented everything Dubas had been preaching about player development. He was a late bloomer who kept improving, a big body who could get to the dirty areas, and a prospect with the kind of intangibles that don't show up in basic statistics, but make all the difference when championships are on the line. The philosophy betrayal here is what makes the Mason Marchment for Denis Malgin trade so absolutely maddening. It represented a complete betrayal of everything Dubas had built his reputation on. For years, this GM had been criticized for being too focused on skill over size, too enamored with analytics over traditional hockey values. But the beautiful thing about the Marlies development program was that it had found the perfect balance. Then, on February 19, 2020, Dubas traded a 6'5" power forward with championship pedigree for a 5'9", 180-pound skilled player who would bounce around the league without making any meaningful impact. It was like watching someone trade a perfectly good truck for a sports car with a broken engine. It made no sense from any angle you examined it. Denis Malgin wasn't some hidden gem waiting to break out. He was a player who had already shown his ceiling in the NHL, and that ceiling wasn't particularly impressive. Meanwhile, Marchment was still developing, still improving, still showing flashes of the power forward the Leafs desperately needed in their lineup. The timing made it even worse. This was during a season when the Leafs were already struggling with their identity, already facing questions about their playoff readiness, already dealing with concerns about their lack of size and sandpaper. Trading away a developing power forward for another small skill player was like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. It addressed none of their actual problems while creating new ones. The what-if scenarios that hurt the most fast-forward of the day, and the painful reality of this trade becomes crystal clear. Mason Marchment has developed into exactly the kind of player the Maple Leafs have been desperately seeking. Multiple 20-goal seasons, consistent playoff production, the ability to play meaningful minutes in crucial situations. He's become everything Dubas should have expected when he was developing in the Marley system. Imagine for a moment what the current Maple Leafs lineup could look like with Marchment in it. Picture him on the left wing beside Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, providing the net front presence and power forward elements that their top line has always lacked. Or consider him on the second line with John Tavares and William Nylander, giving them the physical presence to win battles in the corners and create space for their skill players. The comparison to Zach Hyman is unavoidable and painful. Hyman became the perfect complement to Matthews and Marner, using his size and work ethic to dig pucks out of corners and create second chances around the net. Marchment could have been the next evolution of that role, a homegrown power forward who understood the system and could provide that same kind of value at a fraction of the cost. Instead, the Leafs have spent years trying to find that exact type of player through free agency and trades, spending premium assets and salary cap space to acquire guys who might provide similar value to what they gave away for Denis Malgin. The ripple effects of poor asset management. This trade wasn't just bad in isolation. It represented a fundamental misunderstanding of asset management that had lasting consequences for the franchise. When you're a contending team operating near the salary cap, every roster spot matters, and every cost-controlled contributor becomes incredibly valuable. Marchment would have been exactly that kind of player, a homegrown talent making league minimum salary while providing top-six production and playoff-tested experience. That's the kind of value that allows teams to allocate resources elsewhere to sign the depth pieces and role players that make the difference between regular season success and championship runs. Instead, the Leafs found themselves constantly searching for that missing piece, constantly trying to address needs that could have been filled internally if they had just been patient with their development process. It's a classic mistake of overvaluing immediate help while undervaluing long-term potential, and it cost them significantly in both the short and long term. The philosophical implications were just as damaging. This trade sent a message throughout the organization that development and patience weren't as important as quick fixes and immediate solutions. It undermined the very foundation that had made Dubas successful in the first place, suggesting that the systematic approach to building championship teams had been abandoned for more reactive decision-making. The larger lesson about modern NHL management, what makes this trade particularly frustrating, is how it illustrates broader problems with modern NHL management. Teams get so focused on addressing immediate needs that they sacrifice long-term value for short-term solutions that don't actually solve anything. The Malgin acquisition didn't make the Leafs better in any measurable way, but it cost them a potential impact player for years to come. This is especially problematic for teams operating near the salary cap, where every dollar and every roster spot carries premium value. The ability to develop internal solutions to roster needs is what separates consistently competitive teams from those that peak briefly and then decline. Dubas had proven he could develop those internal solutions, but then abandoned that approach at the worst possible time. The Marchment trade also highlights the importance of understanding organizational identity and staying true to successful processes. The Marlies had developed a winning culture based on patience, development, and believing in their players' potential. Trading Marchment betrayed all of those principles for a quick fix that didn't actually fix anything. The painful reality check looking back now. It's clear that the Mason Marchment trade represents more than just one bad transaction. It was a turning point that showed how even smart, successful executives can make decisions that undermine everything they built. Dubas had created something special with the Marlies development program, but he didn't have the patience to see it through at the NHL level. The irony is that if Dubas had just trusted his own process, if he had kept Marchment and allowed him to develop naturally within the Leaf system, Toronto might have had exactly the kind of player they've been searching for ever since. Instead, they got Denis Malgin, a forgettable footnote in franchise history, who provided nothing of lasting value. This trade should serve as a cautionary tale for every NHL executive. Sometimes the best move is the one you don't make, and sometimes patience with your own development process is more valuable than any quick fix the trade market can provide. What's your take on this whole situation? Do you think Dubas deserves as much criticism for this trade as I'm giving him? Or was this just an unfortunate miscalculation by an otherwise successful GM? And what other trades in recent memory have frustrated you as much as this one frustrated me? Let me know in the comments below. And if this breakdown of organizational decision-making got you thinking about your own team's asset management, hit that like button and let's keep this conversation going.